Good morning, everyone. The webinar will start in approximately 5 minutes. Please stand by.
I guess, Hennie, we'll go ahead and get started.
Yes. You want to do the intro?
Sure. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar series here at SafePaaS. Today, I have our CTO presenting on reducing the costly configuration errors in ERP maintenance and upgrades with automated change management. Hennie's going to go through a presentation with you. If you have any questions, then please feel free to put them in the chat box and we will answer those at the end. I hope you find it very informative. Hennie, over to you.
Thank you, Jane. Good day, everyone. As Jane mentioned, I'm the CTO here at SafePaaS, responsible for all technical aspects, including product delivery. And thank you for your time today, for joining us on this important topic. SafePaaS is a software risk management firm with significant experience establishing application security and controls. Risk management solutions is our sole focus, and we have extended experience including the ERP consulting activities. We have been recognized by several organizations as to our capabilities with a very active leadership presence within the Oracle AUG. As you can see from this slide, we are present in a number of conferences on the left-hand side. We have most recently been recognized by Gartner as having the most comprehensive GRC solution on the market. Further to that, we have a full cross application solution, which is very unique in the market space today. Adul Khan, our CEO, and co-authored a book on GRC for Oracle applications, extending our leadership and knowledge in this area. He also heads up the Oracle GRC SIG. And, on the right-hand side, you can see some of the various webinars that we've done, as well as conferences with some dates, etc., that you can use for future reference. This slide represents the SafePaaS product offerings. SafePaaS is our company name, but it also, provides the name for our solution, our offering. SafePaaS is a platform. We provide a cloud-based application for our customers. What this does is it allows us for rapid deployment and very little maintenance from the customer's perspective. So I'm going to quickly go through the various layers within SafePaaS, which we refer to as the modules. So ArcPaaS right at the bottom, this covers our risk and compliance management for SOX, GDPR, and other compliance requirements, helping organizations manage their organizational and operational risks. Then we move to the left above the ArcPaaS solution. This is our IT governance access controls management area, where AccessPaaS is the module. So AccessPaaS addresses access management for ERP applications, which include iAccess and Firefighter capability, amongst other features. On the right-hand side, on the right-hand side, we have our continuous controls monitoring. MonitorPaaS is our module that we use here, and MonitorPaaS is used for controls monitoring of configuration, master data, and transactions, looking for policy violations and questionable transactions. So this is where you would leverage to use things like fraud detection. If you're trying to find out if there is any fraud in your organization, you would use our transaction monitoring solution. Configuration Monitor is used for the setups in configuring your ERP and so on and so forth. Above that is our ProcessPaaS, which is process controls management. ProcessPaaS is used for process management in order to eliminate errors from out-of-sequence processing of key tasks such as period end close. We all have a financial close process, and in most cases it is a very complex process, and we find that folks use spreadsheets, etc., and it's hard to follow through. What we provide behind the scenes is a full workflow capability, as well as checklist type of capability. And then at the top layer, we have a predictive analysis SafeSite, which is used for dashboarding, analytics, and custom reporting. In conclusion, the key capability of the SafePaaS suite is that it's built on a common database that benefits our clients using the controls framework management. Okay, moving on the next. Application Lifecycle Management. So, you know, ALM is an integrated system, as I'm sure you've heard. It covers the people involved, the processes involved, and the tools to ensure that your environment is free of risk. And so what we're trying to do with ALM is cover all of those various aspects. So all of your business processes, all of the interfaces, all of your various ERPs, and so on. The software development methodology that is being used can be a combination of a waterfall, agile, and or DevOps. The reason I'm saying that is historically companies have been using the waterfall approach, which obviously has its limitations. And what we're finding today is that the agile methodology is much more acceptable. It gets around a lot of the challenges that exist in waterfall, and you're actually able to identify problems much earlier in the process instead of waiting until you get into later stages of your project only to realize that there was a significant design deficiency, etc. What we're noticing on this slide here is your typical application implementation methodology. So on the left-hand side, we have our typical tasks, your project management, business requirements, definition, the architecture, the development, and so on and so forth, right up until the production transition at the bottom. And what you will see here is that really what's important is to ensure for that rapid development is that during all of these phases, there are different things that happen, and sometimes they're spread over multiple areas. A good example here, I mean, obviously, I think everyone understands project management is something that's going to, cover the entire spectrum, all the way from your start, all the way post-production. But if you look at things like solution architecture as an example, in a typical waterfall type project, this would be done up front and be done. What we're seeing in more of an ALM type life cycle is that the solution architecture actually happens throughout, right up until the actual solution acceptance, as is evident over here in the middle of the slide. You will see that during the requirements assessment, there's an element of that. You do your fit analysis, and you get into your collaborative design, and then ultimately solution configuration. The same with system testing. System testing, we don't wait until right at the end to do that. We do that as we go along. And what the benefit of this is that we're able to identify things a lot earlier in the process. And so the net result then is that you can address those things, like you would typically do in an agile type project. So ALM does adopt a kind of hybrid between waterfall and agile, And it tries to extract the best of both of those methodologies into something that is very flexible, allows for rapid change, and a much better end result to be achieved. The other thing worth noticing here is the actual transfer of knowledge. It's very important that knowledge is transferred throughout the entire project. I think a lot of projects suffer because the knowledge transfer is left until after the product goes live or project goes live. The problem with that is that a lot of decisions that was made during the course of the project normally is not included in the knowledge transfer process. And so that knowledge is lost. So by including the knowledge transfer as part of an activity throughout the entire methodology ensures that a lot of those types of activities are actually captured and retained, so that you're in a much better position to be able to actually support the environment going forward. So next, what we're going to do is talk about the Oracle EBS R12 security management. As we all know, ERPs have a very complex security model that is primarily shielded to the end user. What you see on the screen here is a typical user provisioning screen where it is very simple to provision a user. You're specifying a number of fields here, the username, you tie it to a person record, and then you give the person access to said responsibilities. As you can see from the screen, what is not visible here is what are we actually giving this person? Because these responsibilities can actually be anything, right? I mean, the fact that this is receivable role doesn't mean that you're getting that privilege necessarily, because what happens in the Oracle security model is that a user is given a responsibility, but ultimately that responsibility is tied to a menu, which is tied to a function, which is tied to a form. So as you can see from this, that the actual thing that governs what the person can do is 2 levels down and can be masked sometimes by the responsibility name. So, this is why the challenge becomes, okay, how do we manage this from a security perspective? It is important for whoever is going to review this to be able to understand this structure. And sometimes that is a challenge for a business user because they're not familiar with the technical aspects of the complex ERP that they have implemented. The net result is people rely on, looking at just these 2 top layers. They're saying, well, all I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my users, I'm going to see what responsibilities they have, and based on that, I'm going to determine whether I have a risk or not. What we find in most of our customers is that ultimately that produces a huge risk, because the gap that is not looked at is what is the responsibility actually giving the person. And when we start delving down into the responsibility, we're noticing that the responsibility actually was set up way too wide, has way too much privileges that no one is really aware of that the end user actually has. So when we're doing a access SOD test run, we're actually looking at this lowest level and then we roll it up. So we're going to be telling you as a result of this that user X has responsibility Y, user X has function Y, and the way that they've gotten this function is through these responsibilities and these menus. So we're going to give you that full path that leads you from the user all the way to the function. And what this does is it really mitigates that risk, because now you as a business user or as an IT auditor professional, you will be able to identify where the true risks are, and you're not guessing, which is really what you're doing if you're looking at the responsibility level only. So, this is where a product like SafePaaS really shines, because we don't require our users to know this information. We are providing you the means to decipher this using our application. And so, we have the same security model for, or not the same, I mean, there is a similar security model for every ERP. And as you can imagine, every ERP is going to be a little bit different than the other. Some uses responsibilities, some uses roles, others uses privileges, some has a menu in between, some do not. There are some applications which have multiple ways that you can assign privileges. JDE is one that comes to mind, where the complexity is pretty high. So in looking at some of the key factors, we touched on these as I was going through the previous slides. Obviously we've mentioned that ERP systems are very complex. And in Oracle EBS R12 as an example, a typical customer has over 35,000 functions and over 12,500 menus. And so, what's important to realize is the magnitude of what it is you're dealing with. So when you're trying to identify whether you have a segregation of duty, you're really looking for a needle in a haystack, if you can use that analogy. Ensuring that effective roles are designed is key, because if your roles are not effective, you're going to have a lot of intra-role type of violations. The user provisioning process is very important to ensuring control over your ERP. If you don't have a user provisioning process, you run the risk of someone going into the application and just assigning access, and it never goes away. So by having a user provisioning process that goes through a workflow with approvers, etc., as well as a deprovisioning process, will allow you to reduce your risk significantly. The auditability of ERP configuration and data access is also a very key control. You don't want to have a problem when you go through an audit, only to realize that, we actually have a major problem. So it is important to ensure that you have all the controls in place as you're provisioning users in your system, so that at the end of the day, you're able to provide that accountability and not have to scramble at the last minute to provide that information. And then obviously last one here, key factor is, the SafePaaS platform can facilitate multiple ERPs. So we find in this day and age, most customers have an ecosystem of systems. Their HR system and their finance system and back office is not necessarily in the same ERP system. And so that poses a problem. when you're looking at a point solution, since it is not able to go from one application to another. So, talking about how do we ensure that our security is good and that we're not going to have a problem down the road. There is a number of checkpoints that we typically go through. This here is just a sample of that. And you can read through this. It really just touches on the main things, right? You want to make sure that your roles meet your requirements. Your users are assigned with approved responsibilities. If you have custom menus that it's included, you want to make sure your profile options are restricting access. Audit trails is enabled. Personalization and concurrent requests are assigned. The main underlying problem in this day and age with fixing security, from a violation perspective, is to identify where the real offending cases are. And as you can see from this example on the screen, these things are multiple levels deep, as we've indicated earlier on when we talked about the actual structure of a security model in an ERP. They are fairly complex and they have hierarchical structures to them. And sometimes it's very hard to know. I mean, you may say, well, John Doe only has this one responsibility. He's fine. He's not going to be able to do any harm. But the reality is, as you're drilling through all of this, you will realize that no, actually he has problems, right? And so that's really, I think, where a product like SafePaaS can really assist customers in ensuring that they catch all of these things, because it's very hard to do this in spreadsheets or SQL queries to try to identify these layers, etc., and where the actual offending cases may be. So, it's important to automate this process is the bottom line. Next, we're going to move into Oracle EBS R12 configuration management. So this is the area where we have the capability to provide you with, configuration type analysis. And so most organizations have their business processes, which in turn relates to controls. And each of these controls are identified to mitigate a risk. So, a good example is when you're looking at journal authorization limits as an example. So, limits are defined as part of setups, right? So when someone goes in and modifies that limit to, let's say the limit was 5,000. So someone goes in and they change that limit to 10,000, goes and does a transaction and then reverts it back to 5,000. Unless you're monitoring that setup, you will not know that authorization limit has been changed. And so it may take you a very long time to troubleshoot and figure out how is it possible that this transaction happened because it shouldn't have. And so, in many cases, what we find is fraud is the underlying motivation for people to do stuff like this. They will go in because they understand the ERP. And so they will go in and make certain changes or tweaks to the ERP, which in turn changes the behavior of how that ERP is going to perform. And everyone else is expecting the rules that was defined and the setups that was done initially to be adhered to. But the reality is it's changed. So, in between and throughout each process and sub-process, controls are required to ensure integrity, compliance, and policy requirements of the organization. So in the example of the procure to pay process, this is highlighted due to the occurrences and movement of money in and out of the organization. So, you want to make sure that you have controls around your procure to pay process, your P2P process. So, because this affects your bottom line directly. A lot of these other things are more internal, right? So it will have an impact on the financials, but not as direct. Now, you would say, well, so are these not important? No, they are all important. I mean, as you can see from this grid here, all of these are identified as high risks because of the implication of doing these things. So, with SafePaaS, we provide you with a significant objects catalog that allows us to very rapidly deploy these configuration settings within your ERP. So these configuration settings are normally like two-pronged, right? So some of them are going to be more transaction-based to try to identify, problems with transactional type data. And primarily we're looking at that from a fraud perspective. In other words, so did something happen or not? Then the second part of it is the configuration controls. And so with configuration controls, what we're doing is we're really trying to look at the setups of that ERP to ensure that the ERP is configured correctly, and that if there are settings that needs to be changed, that they are audited to ensure that if there are a change happening, that it's captured, and that we can notify all the appropriate people and make sure that that is taken care of. So similarly with configuration testing, we have a checklist that we normally go through. And again, this is a very small sample of, one of these checklists. And this just gives you a taste of the types of things that we would be looking at. So, a good example is general authorization, right? So what do we have these general limits set to for each user? And obviously, if they change, we want to know about it. The same with the enable a depreciation override. This can have a significant impact to how your ERP performs. Security rule and rule elements may be missing. Custom menus needs to be defined. The hold unmatched invoice configuration set to no. So these are all, password lifespan days, configuration not defined. So, obviously that'll create a problem because people won't get prompted to change their passwords. So these are all very critical items that you as, a customer or an organization need to be aware of, because if these things change in this complex ERP that you have, it does have a downstream impact, and you don't want to find out after the fact that, oh, something changed, but you don't know what changed because you don't have the auditability anymore to know that something changed. So looking at the common issues that we're seeing in the industry today as it pertains to, why do companies and organizations look at ALM as a solution? Your typical common issues is everything worked fine in dev, and we promoted everything, and now we're in production and stuff just isn't working. So, that obviously leads to a number of assumptions one can make around that. So, application customizations are lost or broken during an upgrade to a new release. As we all know, Oracle doesn't know about whatever customizations you made to your on-premise EBS environment. So if you had a customization made to a form and Oracle produces a patch for that form, it'll overwrite those customizations if you're not aware. So it's important to identify before you do the upgrade, as part of that analysis, where is the differences, right? What is this patch actually introducing? Functionality between versions is different. Oracle has changed the way that a certain capability is functioning in a newer release, and you're not aware of that. Now all of a sudden you get into UAT and you realize, oops, everything's different now. So again, all of these things can be caught way up early in the process, which is why we want to use an ALM type methodology here. Setups are changed. BR100s was out of date. So a good example, and we run into this all the time, is the BR100 is supposed to tell you exactly how something has been built or configured in your ERP environment. So if that BR100 was not updated as the changes happened, you now sit with a problem that you're going through an upgrade process, as an example. Your BR100 is supposed to capture the entire thing, but it didn't, right? Because an update wasn't made. So now you're basing your decision on that upgrade on the existing BR100, only to find out after you've done the customization that it doesn't quite work the same way that it does in your old system. And the reason for that is that you're missing pieces of the puzzle. You have project overruns because of all of these types of issues, right? And so as a result, you have missed deployment milestones or rollouts for upgrades, which becomes a very manual effort, right? There are ways to do these upgrades in a more automated way, and for the system to tell you what the differences are between your existing environment and, say, R12. Another issue that we run into is security access risks. Things change from version to version or from patch to patch, right? So Oracle releases a patch and it's supposed to fix a bug, but as part of the bug, they realize that they've got to actually fix a responsibility. So this responsibility previously didn't have this access, but now after the patch, it does. So you've just introduced a security risk without knowing that the patch is doing this. So these are areas where SafePaaS can help address a lot of these risks to ensure that you are compliant and that you're mitigating that risk to the best of your ability. Inconsistent Oracle configuration risks, right? So, what we're talking about here is inconsistencies between different ledgers and legal entities in E-Business Suite. It is important to understand what those differences are, because in most organizations, they try to keep things pretty consistent between their ledgers and legal entities. And so, there is no automated way in Oracle that allows you to do that. So the only way to do that is to actually look at them and compare them. So it's important to have the ability to do that. And then, obviously production issues are discovered after go live. This is a very big one. Companies tend to, test the things they know is changing. They don't do a full regression test on everything. If you are doing that, you will realize that that's a significant task. And so what we're trying to do here with ALM is to try to help you identify what it is you really have to test because these things are changing. ERP rollout risks, right? So again, what you will run into here is longer rollout times and higher support issues. You'll most likely have to open multiple SRs to, determine why things are going wrong. And in most cases, it's because a setup value has changed or because of some customization. And these things are easily caught and identified. And that is where you'll save on this additional overhead that you would have. Change management for ERP configurations, we talked about that already. Actual application setup's not the same as the documentation. Again, this is very similar to the BR100 type of conversation, right? So people make changes to the system. Documentation is only as good as the point in time that the documentation was created. Unless you have a business process that says, okay, when we do change management in our ERP, part of the process is not just making the change, but we have to ensure that we also update the documentation and do a number of other things. So this comes back down to that whole process flow I was talking about earlier. If you have a process flow that says, okay, these are the 5 things that needs to happen, and there's a workflow behind it to ensure that it does happen, right? Because just because you have a process does not mean that it's going to be followed, right? That's why we're doing audits against these processes, to make sure that they were followed. So, having that process flow really kind of enforces that. And it also gives you the ability to identify where there's problems. And then the very last one here is almost the biggest one of them all. And that is after you've gone live, right? Everyone's celebrating. It was a great activity. Everyone's happy. The auditors comes in and writes you up for a number of control weaknesses. And everyone's kind of lost the wind out of their sails because they thought everything went well. And now they find out, no, it didn't actually go quite as well. So this is really what we're aiming, and this is why SafePaaS is such a great product to leverage, is because this is our main goal. Our main goal is to ensure that you should not have any control weakness if it's integrated into your process. When we talk about the impact of ineffective configurations, it's, everyone understands that and everyone normally nods and says, yeah, sure, we get that. But what is not always very transparent is the cost. We all understand that there's going to be cost during the project. But what we may not realize at the time is that the longer we wait to identify the problem, the higher the cost gets. Because let's say, for instance, you found the issue here during the design phase, you can correct the design and only do the build once. But if you find the design problem later on during test or UAT, or God forbid, after go live, then you got to go back all the way to the design and build, and you got to repeat all of these activities. So, hence the increased cost to address these inefficient configurations. So SDLC does not include ALM. However, ALM includes SDLC, right? So what does that mean? It means that SDLC is a subset of ALM, and it addresses very specifically the product development activities from start to end. What it does not cover is the peripheral things, right? The people, the processes, the maintenance, the tools that are being used. All of these things are extremely important and needs to be considered when you're deciding to do an SDLC or an ALM. To satisfy COVID, the SDLC will not suffice. And so hence you will need ALM to reduce the risk. On this slide is a depiction of your typical SDLC. The lines here in orange is your typical process, right? You go through requirements gathering, design, configure, build, test, and deploy, right? And it's a waterfall approach, right? We're going through this one thing at a time. The things in red here are the things that really affects your ability to be successful in this waterfall. So, if we discover configuration changes, after the requirements, then obviously that means we now got to go back. The same with documentation configuration and test configurations. So, by intermixing these things, like I was saying earlier, between the SDLC and ALM, you kind of get a best of breed. And so what we're really doing is we're altering the waterfall methodology with an agile approach. Why should we automate configuration management? Well, bottom line is cost, right? So if you're going to be doing things in a manual way, it's kind of sort of an iterative process, right? Because you kind of sort of, do one configuration and you check it. And, it's less upfront because you're kind of doing it ad hoc, right? With an automated approach, really what you're buying here is the ability to minimize the rework activity. The upfront effort is significantly more, right? Because you got to plan for this, and the long-term cost is lower. So, I think it's important to make these design decisions in real-time analytics and configure to make the configuration changes at the time that they need to be made, as opposed to going through a manual process at a later point in time. So next we're going to take a quick look at a case study. We had an aerospace defense customer that used ALM to mitigate a lot of their risks. So, if you look here at the challenges, they had growing cost with complying with regulatory requirements. It was very labor intensive and error prone to make configuration change to their ERP. They had massive access policy violations reported by the auditors. And so after we implemented SafePaaS for them and helped them with their business processes, etc., what we were able to do is reduce the misconfigurations across their various environments by 99% by automating the configuration comparisons and migration process. Furthermore, we identified and remediated 80% of the access violations, and we lowered the ERP total cost of ownership by reducing configuration and management time and cost by 20%. So, that's the nutshell. Next, we're going to move into a Q&A session. So, Jane, if you can, I don't know if there's been questions coming in. We can maybe field some of those.
Sure. We have a couple of questions here. One question is, we have other third-party applications. How does the solution address these?
So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, our platform is heterogeneous, which means that we can connect to anything. Now, if you look at the slide on the screen, it's kind of the depiction of the existing connections that we have today. Our platform is very easily configured for any additional ERPs that you may have that you need to connect to. So let's say, for instance, you have some custom application, some third-party application that was developed just for your industry. Maybe you're the only customer, I don't know, we can definitely configure the SafePaaS platform to consume that information and be able to include that as part of the solution.
One more question. Is the solution cloud or can it be installed on-premise?
The solution is on cloud. We do, however, for some specific cases, provide the capability to run our cloud version on-premise. But it is still considered our cloud solution. It is handled the same way. So when we're applying patches to our cloud, those same patches will get pushed to your on-premise environment. So the behavior is exactly the same. There is no difference. We do not have a separate on-premise solution. It is one and the same. So I like to refer to it as, SafePaaS Cloud on-premise.
Perfect. Well, I think that's all of the questions that we have for today, Hennie. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through the solution, and we look forward to welcoming you to the next webinar. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.